But I guess, yeah, there's often accusations levied against philosophy as sort of being this like intellectual circle jerk of like, what are you actually achieving? And like, for the record, circle jerks do achieve some desirable outcomes.
depending on
That's
your,
not necessary.
yeah.
That's not the insult you think it is. um, the point is that
makes me
I
feel
think
way
there
better
is
about my lower back tattoo.
You shouldn't, but the point is that
there's a horse. I saw. I don't know where this came up. Advertisement for a horse Reiki specialist.
all right.
Which
you'll have to explain to me what Reiki is exactly. I know it's like
you don't know Reiki.
I've definitely heard of it, but
yeah,
do
okay.
tell.
You would have probably repressed the concept for the sake of your IQ. But Reiki is essentially somewhere between like Neji's jutsu, chakra blocking jutsu, but it's like just you hold your hands above the person, like they're lying down on a massage table. You hold your hands above them. There is no contact, and it's the energy transfer from you into, I guess, opening the chi or chakra or whatever it is, depending on what kind of medicine that they're working with. But I don't know whether you're blocking an adhesion or you're just putting good energy into them.
Right.
But that's Reiki. And so that is a service that people pay for. And then apparently now you can get people who are qualified. I feel like a lot of this conversation will be quotation marks, so people can just insert as they need to. But people can get qualified in horse Reiki.
Yeah, that'd be a good drinking game. It's just like, guess when Lyndon and Cadd are doing air quotation marks.
Yeah, exactly right. For the podcast version.
But that's insane. Like that, well, I guess that just speaks to the environments a little bit that we're both in, sort of thing. Like you being in Brunswick predominantly, you're surrounded by a little bit more of that alternative kind of culture.
Yeah.
Me being within my bedroom, I'm surrounded by the bathroom and the kitchen. So.
Yeah. Well, the thing that got me with horse Reiki is like what kind of income bracket do you have to be in to think that that's going to be a good use of your time to have a horse, and then also have this disposable income to go, I'm going to get this specialist in to put their hands next to my horse and put energy into it to heal its, I guess, feelings.
That's amazing. Like, to be like, yeah, the solid is sound on this in humans, so I'm pretty sure this should work in horses.
Well, and this is actually, so one of my friends, I got into a heated, and my mum, like, it started off as a joke, but now she just knows not to say acupuncture because I'll get triggered. But they were saying like there's a lot of people kind of, there's vets that actually do like acupuncture in animals, and that is a lot for me to wrap my head around. Where do you stand on the acupuncture? Like this probably won't go in the full version chat, but this could be the deleted scenes. But where do you stand on acupuncture? I'm sure you've got some thoughts.
Like, my thoughts are mostly based around a failure to understand. Like, I guess I probably not so things I get triggered over are more like horoscopes and things like that. But when it comes to alternative medicine,
we can go deep on some things in this chat. That's fine. I'm throwing the script away, and we're just going to talk about what irks you the most.
Oh man, like I'll come back to that point. But when it comes to alternative medicine, I guess I don't want to say open-minded, but I probably have a greater degree of confusion and uncertainty. Like there is it really depends on the claims being made, obviously, by someone. Yes. Like if you are, say, if you're an elite athlete who has effectively tried, everything, first set of or second set of air quotation marks.
we'll keep a running total.
Like if you've tried, say, all reasonable methods, and you still seem to be battling some kind of injury, or like it might be psychosomatic and it's sort of not entirely physical, but potentially exploring some alternative medicine methods might, it might be placebo effect, whatever, and then that helps that person reach a new level or like play better, and then all of a sudden they're spruiking, I shot 47 points in the third quarter because acupuncture. It's like that's an issue. The N=1 of that athlete, though, I don't necessarily think that's an issue. Like, I'm totally all for them exploring that. But that's, I guess, when someone becomes a spokesperson for something that they don't even understand themselves, that's probably when we start to see issues.
Yeah, I guess it's that false and false attribution bias, where you're like, just because you got the right response is fine, but as soon as you then claim, again, so, causation versus correlation, as soon as you claim causation from something, we would like to see, then it becomes an issue for other people. If you're saying, well, here was my experience with it, but especially from a sports person standpoint, or from a general, that's the problem, I guess, is it's so much easier just to say, as a throwaway line to say, I got acupuncture and then I played better. And then people will automatically draw that conclusion of, well, one caused the other. It's that difference, I guess, between, coming across as quite closed-minded, because I am probably not quite as open to, to alternative medicine as some other people I know, some friends and some family members. But I guess it's exactly that as well, where I'm like, if people want to try something, that's fine, but it also becomes, you can't try everything, and so you've got to have, most of the time, you've got to have some rationale for deciding whether or not you think something is going to be effective before you go into it. And of course, that can kind of affect how effective the process is in the first place.
No, totally. I think you make some excellent points there, and I think there is a degree of bias isn't quite the right word. Maybe uncritical support for open-minded thinking. Like, open-minded thinking definitely seems to be, I guess you need to have some kind of open cognitive system in order for it to incrementally explore more possible truths and then sort of maintain what turns out to be true. So having an open system in that regard is pretty good, but I don't think it's just this inherently good thing. And like, it's very much sort of just like, in order to have an effective plumbing system, it needs to be able to open when it's required, but it also should be able to close when it should as well. And I think to say that, like, someone might, as you said, accuse you of being a closed-minded thinker, and I get accusations of that at times as well. So not to sort of try and position myself as like, oh, look at me, I'm the guy who's willing to explore these things in an open-minded manner, whereas Cadd's very closed-minded, because to a degree, and I think this, not to a degree that's maybe underselling, I think to a very significant extent, there should be pushback against a lot of these concepts, because there are these ideas, the sort of the combination of ideas that exist at any one time, what forms the zeitgeist, or the ether, like that sort of intellectual matrix that is surrounding us. And I think of someone like Steve Jobs, who explored alternative medicine up until the point where his basically like stomach cancer wasn't being cured, and then sort of too late tried to jump on the the Western air quotes, whatever, I'm not sure, like just actual medicine bandwagon.
Yeah. Evidence-based. I don't know if you use evidence-based, maybe, I guess.
Yeah, and let's say he was surrounded by people who more aggressively pushed back on things like that, he probably wouldn't have explored that alternative path for as long as what he did. And I don't recall the exact specifics of, that sort of his case and whatnot. I don't want to suggest that it was like, oh, it was one dumb single thought that killed Steve Jobs, but
you heard it here first.
It's like, yeah, Apple's kind of cool, but he was an idiot.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't dare suggest that. And like, of course, we see some correlations and some groupings of the way people think and the kind of beliefs they have about the world. Like, he's clearly a creative, clearly very sort of non-traditional in the way he thought. So it's not surprising that he would have gone for non-traditional medicine sources. But I guess it's just disappointing. Like, people push back when, say, people like us push on those ideas and say, like, no, this needs to go away. Like, and they're like, oh, it's not hurting anyone, but like, ultimately it does if you're not careful about it. So, yeah, I'll close by sort of paraphrasing Thomas Sowell. Like, he always makes the sort of claim that people who don't pay the price of decisions shouldn't be making those decisions. Like, we see government bureaucracy and things like that making policy decisions that about mental health or low income and poverty and things like that. And it's like, those people aren't the ones actually affected by those policies. And it's not to say that, you just pull some homeless person off the street and be like, hey, what policy you want? Like,
what do you want to see changed? Yeah.
And that kind of ties in a little bit with, I guess, like Nassim Taleb's concept of like skin in the game. Like, if you're not risking at least some of your own skin, then you are insulated from feedback and not motivated to make the best decisions. And I think a lot of us forward beliefs and be like, oh yeah, like, doesn't matter. Like, I'll wear this belief as some form of like identity attire. Be like, yeah, I'm pro horoscopes. But some people actually will act on that, and you may be doing them some damage.
Yeah. It's all fun and games until someone says they will or will not date a certain star sign or something like that, and then you're like, okay, well, I mean, it's like reading your horoscope in one day is fine, but that is also going to change, how your view on the day. And as soon as that changes something like your potential partner in life or potential mate, that can have some downstream consequences.
For sure.
That's a really good way of putting it, as far as that framework of open-minded versus closed-minded thinking. Because, like I said, so I've got a friend that I'll use these terms very loosely because I'm not heavily in the political sphere anyway. But I've got a friend of mine who, like, I like to think that I lean towards the left. Right. And I like to think that I'm reasonably progressive with a lot of the stuff I think about. I've got a friend of mine who, when I sit down and have a chat with him, makes me look like Donald Trump's second penis. Like, I seem so right wing, hardcore, and that when I'm having these conversations with him, I end up playing basically a Republican diplomat. Like, I'm hardcore. I just come across and then halfway through a conversation, I'll be like, hang on, these are not the beliefs that I hold, but, in playing the devil's advocate, basically just for the source of, stimulating conversation, I'm just by, I guess, relatively pushed into the, seems like, far right. And I think that's probably something that you experience as well. If I come across and I go, well, like, here's the reasons why I think we should be careful about promoting acupuncture or allowing it to just proliferate, and whether it's acupuncture or some other kind of, alternative medicine, or maybe you should put these, try putting these crystals inside you before you get, stomach cancer surgery. I think, relative to that, you will then get people who are, quote unquote, that's number 3, open-minded, who will actually then shut the gate. You go, okay, well, maybe you should get a vaccine because X, Y, and Z. And that's where they'll shut the gate. And I go, I'm an open-minded person, but I'm not willing to engage your conversation of vaccines. And you're like,
completely.
that framework of open-minded becomes this this excuse to actually then push against something that you don't like and select actually what you do like anyway, which I would see as more close-minded than I guess evaluating something through a more, I guess, science-driven or rationally driven lens.
No, I think you make some excellent points there, and the parallel that kind of comes to mind is if we're sort of looking in the more, or defining these sort of thought processes as slightly more progressive or conservative. One of the trends in politics a little bit at the moment is that the more conservative thinkers basically think we can move beyond racism, like if we effectively stop talking about racism. But the sort of the progressive left, and again, like I very much like sympathize and like identify with I guess maybe like more classical liberal political values. There's a lot of progressivism in that. But yeah, I guess the now considered progressive left is very focused on dragging things back to, yeah, but slavery, yeah, but this and that. And the conservative sort of minded political thinkers are like, now, hey, it's like, at what point can we move? At what point have we sort of cleared this debt? And I'm not saying like, I'm not at all suggesting that it is cleared. And I think that's a very complex issue. But what I'm saying is there's a paradox there that the conservatives do think we can transcend racism and the history of slavery, which is an extremely progressive stream of thought in comparison to continually going back to, yeah, but slavery. And I think that maybe speaks to your point a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons, again, why anyone who, as soon as you want to stick your flag in the ground on something, so I am liberal or I am conservative, or we lose so much of that nuance that really I think we've got a lot of people who are trying to do the right thing, basically caught in what would be traditionally viewed as conservative lenses, or like you said, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think as soon as you stick your flag in the ground on something, you run into trouble. Little segue, I have been doing a lot more on TikTok, which is a sentence I never thought I would say, but it's been a whole interesting world. But I actually find it's a really good place. I've luckily come across, it turns out the algorithm's actually helping me out a lot, because I've come across quite a good niche of people trying to convey quite good common sense fitness. Luckily, I haven't been exposed to, so I've got all positive things to say about my experience. Of course, there is also, like with every social media, with every platform, there's the other side, which is all detoxes and things that I know for a fact that you don't support, detoxes and glute kickbacks and booty bands and all that stuff. So I'm sure it's all on there, but I haven't been exposed to it, so I've had a great time. Right, I've got my little echo chamber over here, and I'm having a great time. But as always, you get hate comments, and I was like, in previous times, we subscribed to an ideology. Someone had to, someone would become a liberal or a conservative, and that's and that's what they would put their flag in. Or even more than that, I'm not even like, it's not coming to me now, but like other subcategories, we want to define ourselves with something. In the kind of 21st century onwards, I think the equivalent of that is changing your username to something, is putting it in your username. That's like as most commitment we have to it. But I had I got into a disagreement with someone the other day who had something along the lines of their username of like, eat raw meat. Or it's like, carnivore Dave or something like that, or, the vegan extremist. And like, it's like, if you're willing to go to the extreme of putting your username in this ideology that you've subscribed to, you're just not going to be able to have an unbiased look at the world as soon as you've taken that step to like, eat raw, eat meat, @gmail.com. Like that's as close we get to these days as like really finding a religion or something that we stand behind.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Jacob was actually the first person to point this behavior out to me. Probably pointed out to me maybe a few years ago, actually. He was sort of, had very much had his finger on the pulse in this regard. And because I was someone that sort of did semi-frequently change their Instagram handle or whatever the technical nomenclature is, username. Like I still say like profile picture, and people like, man,
it's fine. So, I'll as long as I'm in your top friends after this, I'll be happy. I'll be happy.
A lot of people. Valentine as my theme song.
There's a lot of people that won't get that reference, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, that's sad. But yeah, I guess like I didn't quite understand his point at the time. He was definitely more speaking to the framework that you're speaking about, but like I would just do really jokey things like Australian Lyndon or like Strassenberg Brap 250.
Yeah. Okay.
Just like dumb like changes, because it was an easy way to get a boost in likes. Like you just change the username to something dumb and funny and then upload, and it was like, oh, Lyndon's uploaded a new photo, semi-funny caption. Oh, and he's like been an idiot and changed his username. Like it was sort of just this. I enjoyed doing that, but he was definitely more speaking to the like, if you are changing the sort of the category you're attaching to your username, or like even your bio, it's just like, my bio is sort of generally whatever it is. It's like, I'm into like books and writing and thinking and dinosaurs. Like, whether it's like, I created a Twitter account, sort of like, as you were saying, you jumped on TikTok. Like I was like, I'm going to create a Twitter account and see if it's actually that, like the wormhole that people say it is. And I sort of just like punched in again. It's just like, say a little bit about yourself. I'm like, I'm going to say the same things that I always say. But I guess his point was, if this week you're pro-vegan and then you're, anti-crime in, Uganda or something like that, and then you're like this, that, and the other, it's sort of like you're just chasing this. I guess it's a little bit sort of virtue signaling in one degree, but also just unsure about your identity in another. So yeah, I'm not sure if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I have so many thoughts. We've really jumped into the deep end here, but I think that's historically been most of our conversations anyway. I remember Jacob saying something about that. And at the time, it was at a powerlifting competition, and he just kind of like blurted it out, or I think Jack might have, someone pointed at it, like said something, and he kind of just threw it at me and walked off. And I was like, all right, here's this big guy. So this is Jacob, who's the owner of Jacob Sheppes, who's the owner of one of the owners of JPS Health and Fitness. I think he just like shook my hand, like shouted it at me and walked off. And I was like, that was a lot to take in at once. And it probably wasn't quite as eloquent as he would have put it if we had sat down and had this chat. But now that you mention it, like that was exactly what he was saying. It was like, if someone's changing their Instagram bio every 2 weeks, then like pretty much what do they actually stand for? And at the time, I just kind of dismissed it as I was like, I mean, if people want to change their Instagram bio, they can, but you're exactly right. And he's exactly right, is that, like it's a very public declaration of what you believe. And I think that's the cheapness of it nowadays, is like, we can virtue signal, like, not to shame people who are trying to do the right thing. Not everything is virtue signaling. There are a lot of people who are genuinely trying to help a situation, but it's such a cheap and easy way to say this is what I believe, versus it's a lot harder to believe something and actually take actions that show that you believe that thing when no one's looking. And especially nowadays, I've got some friends of mine who I don't doubt are very well intentioned, but have since come, like they look to me from the outside like, I guess, social justice warriors. And not to not to take away from it, but you know, if every story you post, if you post 5 stories a day and every story is for a different cause, you're not effectively making a difference in any of them, the way I look at it. And like, there's an argument for like, okay, well, the more information you can spread, the better, but you can't fix everything. I think my sister did development studies at uni, and she actually walked away from that so disheartened, because you actually go into the complexities of how insanely difficult it is to pick one issue and then work towards helping that. Or, you know, if you seriously are passionate about spreading how effective the carnivore diet is for people, then that's kind of going to need to be your lifetime thing. It shouldn't be, just to stress it should not be your lifetime cause. But if that was your lifetime cause, then like, if you're gonna go to the extent of like, you know, again, putting your flag in the carnivore you know, message, then you don't really have the luxury of flip-flopping on your ideas. Yeah,
I think there's a lot of good value and a lot of good points in that, as opposed to that not good value. There's a lot of good points in that,
which is the rest of my other content, which doesn't have you on it. So
thank you. You make me laugh. And then I don't know how to deal with the compliment.
that's it. If it makes you feel any better, that was like very underhanded. Like, I like to make them as convoluted as possible.
But to your points, I do agree about sort of the general, you know, if you're posting 5 stories a day, you're probably not actually doing that much, like anything. But to sort of give a slight caveat to that, I was really pleased when I saw one of my very best friends, from all the way from kinder, like sort of through high school, from my hometown, posted something the other day, and it's really nice, I guess. When I say I'm pleased, is because like I've always known like Nathan is his name, to be a good person, but it's nice when you see your friends or like anyone, but like especially your friends and people you care about, sort of like transcend that fear of sort of like actually revealing like their true self on sort of social media and things like that. And he just like, it was very simple, and I'm not saying this is even the first instance of it, but he just reshared something that was to the tune of don't feel like you should do nothing just because you can do very little, or something like that. Or like, don't excuse yourself from doing anything just because what you can do is very little.
Yeah.
And I really do echo that point, and would love to sort of like boost the signal of that point. But in saying that, that's not to disagree with sort of your critique of a lot of the general, hey, here's how I'm going to promote change. I'm going to just like, you know, reshare my 60th thing on the 60th topic of the day, and like, look how much good I've done for the world. It's
one prayer.
Yeah, like, I guess as you said, it's like, if you truly do care about this issue, it's like you are willing to forego the mundaneness of pushing that issue day in, day out for years, possibly decades on end. And that's not easy, but it just does exemplify. And this is not necessarily a criticism. Like, it's understandable that people want to feel like they're doing good for the world. But I think it's also very, very important that we understand there are better and more effective ways to do good for the world. Because if the only filter we used was, does this feel like it's doing good, then we wouldn't actually do that much good. And it's super amazing and incredible to look at the people such as like someone like Bill Gates, who is studying, like, deeply looking into sort of like sanitation in third world countries. Like, I couldn't think of a less sexy topic to really dive into. But like, we need to be grateful for someone like that, because he's doing more good than possibly like I couldn't even imagine doing that much good
Mm.
in 10 lifetimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I guess that's probably my general thoughts in that area. Like not to attack people that think they are doing good, but if you truly do want to do good, you do need to pay attention to like the actual effect that you're having.
Yeah. If you actually do want to make change, you actually have to do, like, you'd have to do something to a degree. Yeah, like I said, it's a really conflicting thing. And I think this year, I don't know if it's this year or it's just my emotional state, whether I'm a bit more, I guess, introspective on some of these things. You know, maybe in previously I would have just been one of those people sharing something and giving myself a pat on the back. But I'm much more interested in, I guess I'm much more discerning in my causes now. And that requires like sacrifice. It means that I'm not going to, that's very melodramatic, which is again a recurring theme in my life. But it's melodramatic, like not to
You
say
need some Reiki.
Yeah, I do. My upper back Reiki would calm that down. That's like, it's not to say that, you know, sacrifice sounds a bit melodramatic, but at the end of the day, like for me, I made one of my posts, again, like a good Gen Z or millennial or whatever I am, to say, you know, this, to segue everything back to a post I made on Instagram. That's my most contribution to the world. But I think the post I made that I was probably the most proud of, because I spent a lot of time trying to, I guess it's probably the same feeling you get every time you churn out a blog, where you've actually done some deep thinking on something. But on charity, I've got a lot of thoughts around charity. And I guess one of the things that I realized is that for me personally, I think I can be more effective by picking a few causes that I believe in and then setting up a donation to those charities every month for the rest of my life until I die. And even though that means that, you know, and I'll make some other donations to things that I think are important every now and then, but it's like, you know, you can donate $1,000 to the Horse Reiki Foundation because they're really low on funds during Corona. They have to have even more social distancing from the horses. And that's great, but it's also like, from a organizational standpoint, that is harder for, I believe, for the charity to work with, because they get $1,000 and that's great, but then they've got to set up, you know, they've got to start initiatives that are going to then pay long term, versus setting up, you know, versus something else that you might feel more important, like you might feel is more important, and then setting up a $20 donation every month for the rest of the life. Does that make sense? I've kind of jumped around.
Yeah, no. I think I've understood the point you're getting at, and I think you raise some fantastic points and issues, possibly about how we think about charity, because for the most part, it seems that we engage with charitable behavior in order to feel good about ourselves. That seems to be like a very significant component of why we donate to charity. Sort of that was illustrated once, I guess, the argument was sort of made that I guess the black box always in the equation of like, well, no, surely people sort of donate to charity for good reasons, was always the like, well, what about the person that donates like $1 million anonymously? They're like, surely they're doing it for good reasons. It's like, but once the sort of argument was made that for the most part, that person does it because they then become the person that donated $1 million to charity, and they don't have the social reward of that, but like the internal reward of that behavior is, you would imagine, extreme. So I guess the point I'm making there is, and this is just probably one of my hobby horses, that we cannot disentangle ourselves from selfish motives. Like, you can definitely undertake more pro-social behavior. I think that's probably the best way to think about it. It's like we have pro-social, a spectrum of pro-social to anti-social behavior, and we're definitely like a neutral zone in the middle. But I don't think selfish versus unselfish is the correct terminology, because I think there always needs to be a self to commit commit the potentially unselfish act, and there will always be some kind of reward system involved in the behavior. So yeah, I think pro-social, antisocial is the correct way to think about it. But to your point, and I'm not a consistent donator to charity currently, but that is something I feel supremely guilty about. And I've spoken about this at length with a few different people. And typically the common feedback I get is, and not to sort of stroke my own, horn, ego, whatever the saying is, but typically like the feedback I get is like, you do a lot of good for people. You're very reliable. You're very caring for your family and friends. Like, don't feel guilty. There's people that earn way more money than you that don't donate. And my feeling to that is like, I think that is entirely not irrelevant, but unconvincing. And I still do think I should feel guilty for not donating. I could, if I spent the time and effort to take care of my finances, I would be able to free up a portion of money. But I guess like the current appraisal of my behavior and my incentives and motivation is that not to do that. But I guess what I have decided is like there's a certain amount that I'm going to begin donating on a consistent basis next pay rise. Like that is just whatever that may be. It might be a $10 pay rise, and I will still have to donate the amount of money that I've sort of predetermined ahead of time. And then my goal is to do that effectively. And I don't want to say this because like I get the virtue sort of points of saying it out loud without even having to do it, but just for the sake of actually communicating to you and telling you sort of where my thought processes are. Like my goal is very much in line with what you said, to set up a direct debit and do it every day or like every week, whatever it is, sort of until I die. And over any given week, month, or year, like that won't be a substantial amount of money, but in the long run, that will be hopefully very effective. And there's a really good blog by Scott Alexander on this topic, who I think is just an outstanding thinker. And he goes over effective altruism, sort of like that general movement of, like, for the listeners at home, that there is genuinely some charities that are, say, like 100 times more financially efficient than others. You can donate $1 to them and they will do as much with that $1 as donating $100 to another charity. And I think if we care about the effects of our money, not just the psychological reward for donating it, then we need to consider how the money's being spent. But the point he makes is that we should basically establish Schelling points. I think that's how you pronounce it. So let's say like a Schelling point is, it's SCHELLING. A Schelling point is basically an arbitrary point, but it loses its arbitrariness once, I guess, the point has been established. It's kind of like, hey, Braden, let's meet on the Oval at 6 p.m. tomorrow. And there's a Schelling point in both space and time there, like 6 p.m. being the time and the Oval in space. And there's nothing special, say, about the 6 p.m. or the Oval until the fact we both meet there, like at the same time. Like, and then the point becomes useful. And I might be getting some terminology incorrect here, or even just generally misunderstanding the concepts, but I think the concepts at large are useful. And the point he made is we shouldn't be going through this sort of constant internal battle of like, should I donate? How much should I donate? Blah, blah, blah. He's like, 10% of your income. Donate 10% of your income. Like he was sort of proposing establishing this like Schelling point of just like 10%. You can live with 90% of your current income.
Yeah.
Like we all probably could. Imagine if like, and again, as I said, I haven't even acted on this, but it's very much, I guess, ideas that are now in my head. If we if we began to sort of establish Schelling points like this, and I think in regards to charity, be very useful. But I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on that, because I said a lot there.
That you said a lot there, and they're all like, I am gonna think about this chat for the next few years, and I've been meaning to chat to you for a while, because like we've been kind of around similar social circles for a long time, but have never really, I guess, sat down and nutted out a lot of these ideas. That's a really interesting concept. We're going to come back to that. I want to touch on that. We're going to come back to Schelling points in general, because I think that's such a useful practical, whether you want to use like I guess decision making framework, or just I guess efficiency framework for a lot of things in life, probably. But just to touch on charity, I mean, one of my favorite podcasts is Philosophize This by Stephen West. And I went back to, episode 1, we've talked about this. I went back to episode 1 and I was like, okay, well, I'm interested in the Stoics. So I went back to like episode 20, which is the Stoics. And then I was like, oh, well, that was really cool. Maybe I'll go back to episode 1. And now I've listened to all 185 or whatever he's up to. And it's the only thing I signed up to Patreon, whatever that is, to donate, because after episode 100, I was like, this man deserves some kind of financial reimbursement for the 100 episodes that I've listened to, and the insane work that goes back into it. So there's an episode in there where he discusses Peter Singer, who I believe is either the creator or the biggest attributor in the public sphere to the effective altruism concept. Do you know if he created it, or is he just?
I believe Will MacAskill was very foundational or formative in this area. I think Peter Singer is probably, as you said, the most prominent sort of spokesperson.
Well, he did a TED talk on it, therefore it's claimed the rights to the idea.
Well, very much so. And it's like, I think it was because he is an established philosopher very much for his work in regards to animal rights and things like that. And it was sort of a more lateral shift. And I don't want to discredit him, because not to say he may have been entirely integral to the process, but my understanding is Will MacAskill, and I believe there's, I think Toby Ord was maybe another one. I believe those are the two names, but anyway, okay. Regardless, go on with your point. Sorry.
Yeah, I haven't heard of Ord. I know a little bit of MacAskill's work. The podcast episode was on, like I said, Peter Singer, and he basically started the episode with saying, okay, well, if you are, and I hands down credit this with my kind of foray and spending a lot more time, and basically the push to make a practical move into to actually setting a time to donate to charity. And his basically example was, okay, well, if you came out of a restaurant and you saw a 5-year-old girl lying in the gutter, bleeding from the head, would you do something about it? And I'll ask you that. Just work with me. I'll ask you the question. You can play it out. That's fine. I was going to keep it hypothetical, but I mean, your answers will probably be normal or interesting. But either those are the two. Those are the two.
Like selfie moment.
Caveats. Exactly. So, like, yes, right. Most people would say yes. There's a 5-year-old girl there. She's bleeding from the head. You would help her. Okay. Now, if you were standing out the front of the restaurant and you saw a bunch of people walking past, look at her and not help, would you make a moral judgment about them?
Yes.
Yes, most of us would, right? And so then the question becomes, if you are kind of morally, and I might be butchering this example, but if you feel like morally compelled to help, if you can in that situation, and you feel a moral judgment for the people who walk past and don't help, then that says something about kind of your belief system anyway. Now, if you were on TV watching, CCTV footage and you watched this situation occur, you would probably still feel the same kind of moral, judgment towards people that just looked down at this 5-year-old kid and then kept walking, right? And so the questions that this kind of poses is, okay, well, when do we feel morally compelled? It's the kind of the kind of, I guess, decision points are, well, can I actually help? And if you're watching it on TV, you can't help, so you don't feel morally compelled in yourself, right? You don't feel bad because you didn't help this 5-year-old girl who was on TV. So it's whether or not you are actually have the capacity to help. And then the second question is, I guess, well, then do you have awareness of the issue? Because we know all around the world there are people who are hurting. There are people who are fallen over in the gutter, but because we're not aware of it, we're not hurt by it. And I guess when you look at those two kind of major decision points of, do we know there are people hurting, and do we actually have some capacity to help? And you're like, well, most people would say, the same answers for you do, is that, like, we know people are hurting, and yes, we have some capacity to help, whether that's 10% of your income or $1. We do have the capacity to help. And the question is, well, then why are you not doing anything about it?
I think that's really interesting example, and a few things spring to mind. Like, the first is, well, yeah, I'll start there. The first is, it at least indicates to me that there is value in philosophy and thought experiments and things of that nature. Like,
so
it's
you're saying I haven't been subjecting all of the people around me to the trolley problem for shits and giggles. They hate me. Every third date I've ever been on is the trolley problem, and that normally
I raise the trolley problem. I raise the trolley problem, and people are like, oh, like that scene from Harry Potter. Not quite.
not quite.
But I guess, yeah, there's often accusations levied against philosophy as sort of being this, like, intellectual circle jerk of, like, what are you actually achieving? And, like, for the record, circle jerks do achieve some desirable outcomes.
depending on
that's not necessary.
Yeah.
That's not the insult you think it is. The point is that
makes me feel way better about my lower back tattoo.
You shouldn't, but the point is that there is still some practical value and real world effects of well-designed and well-constructed thought experiments. Like, just as there is empirical experiments and things of that nature, that, yeah, we don't necessarily need to be experimenting in the real world. We can do it in our heads and still have generate effective outcomes from that. And I think that thought experiment is an example of that. The other thing I would say is it highlights, and this is to a degree, I'm just looking for evidence that confirms my own already biases, but I guess I have an interest in rationality, as you're aware, sort of critical thinking, trying to strip back the biased ways that we look at the world, which is not to say they're maladaptive, but there are ways that we can hopefully do better. And you raise sort of two good cognitive biases there. One is that we are just, like, more prone to act when things are salient, visible, in front of us, have sort of a narrative component. It's easier to, or like how people are even more likely to donate to like that one starving child than they are sort of 100,000 starving children. Like, there's a scalability issue there.
Yeah,
And like the visible example in front of you is another sort of an even more salient, narratively dense and strong sort of construction of that. The other is the fundamental attribution error, which sort of more so relates to your example about watching someone on TV, or like multiple people on TV. And in those examples, we watch people and we think that is horrible, and we morally condemn them, or we maybe not even morally condemn. It might be in, say, some, like, you're watching someone on a quiz show, and it doesn't even have a moral component. You think, oh, I would have got that answer, like, because you were able to shout that answer out at home or something like that. But just in general, like, you watch someone do something poorly, whether it be moral or performance based, and you you cast judgment and think, I would have done better in those circumstances. But the important thing that we sort of forget is that we're basing that on our own sort of character judgment, and we don't recognize how strong circumstances are for driving our behavior. And it's just like, if you were actually in that person's shoes, you probably would have acted in the exact same way as they did. You would have succumbed to the pressure. You would have walked past, ignored the person in the gutter. Like, you are effectively not as good a person as what you think you are, and you're just at that point being an armchair moral philosopher.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, for all his flaws and criticisms or critics, maybe, like Jordan Peterson does get, I think, very correct, is the idea that, if you were a German in Nazi Germany, you would have acted as the Germans in Nazi Germany did. Like, don't, I guess, like, and even, I was reading in How to Win Friends and Influence People the other day, which is not a very Lyndon book to read, but I'm enjoying the exploration of it.
The theoretical framework of socializing.
Yeah, the social construct of socializing. Like, Carnegie makes a really good point in that. Is like, when you're disagreeing with someone, you should basically lead with, if I was in your shoes, I would feel the exact same way. Because he's like, the important point is like, if you were in their shoes, you would feel the same way. It's not just this throwaway statement. And I guess that's sort of the point that I'm getting at, is like, one, we shouldn't think so much of ourselves morally or like condemning other people for failing to act morally, because we would basically do the same thing. And if we get off a moral high horse, we might actually be more motivated to undertake moral behavior. Like, if we recognize how inferior our current level of moral behavior is, we should hopefully be motivated to undertake more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, there's some big ideas going on there as well. No, really good. Look, I mean, we'll kind of circle back. I'll change the conversation a little bit back to kind of, the framework that I sent you through, which we haven't even touched on, which is great, because there's no reason we need to touch on anything in particular. But I do just want to take a second to say, and this is what occurred to me when, after that thought exercise was posed, and I went, the same thing with the closest thing I have to a productivity hack is like, just do it now. And I was like, so if anyone does listen to this, and I think this is probably the most good that could actually come from this, is if someone who does actually listen to this actually stop listening to this right now, pick a charity that you like, or it doesn't even have to be the right one. Don't worry about, you can jump on Effective Altruism. I think they've got an Australian spin-off, which is what I used, I think. Or whether it's just a charity you like, even if you don't have time to research whether it's the best or most efficient charity, because that's what put me off for a long time. Like yourself, I think, Lyndon, I went, oh, well, I want to look for the most efficient charity in the world. And like, just start donating to someone now. Jump on, it'll take literally 7 minutes. Set up a regular donation. If it's $1 a month, that's great. And then from there, when you've got more time, you can research other charities and go into it. And so for myself, I jumped, I did that. I went, well, when I had the thought, it wasn't, I made sure that I didn't go, oh, well, next week I'll set up my charity or something like that. I went, okay, well, right now I'm going to do it. I've got half an hour at a cafe. I'm going to do it. And I, like a good hipster, had my long black, and I looked into a few charities. And I think the ones I went with, like there's a Deworm the World initiative, which I believe Bill Gates is tied into somehow, because he's very big in trying to remove guinea worm. Schismiasis or schismatosis, which is again like a parasite from snails that people just don't take into. It's a forgotten disease in the modern world. And then I believe another one that was like involved with research funding. And I was like, here's some things that I personally feel really passionate about. They're not flashy. And it was another one for malaria. And so I think I jumped on altruism, and I was the effective altruism. It was like, here's the amount of money that I can live with comfortably coming out of my account without affecting me. And then allowing them to kind of allocate the funds as they see fit. But the reason I picked those in particular was because they are things that I think are largely forgotten by, they're not flashy. Like I said, they're not sexy by any means. But they also have quite a young, especially in the cases of something like guinea worm or a lot of parasitic worms, they have quite a young, there's a fancy way of saying that, but they affect people when they're young. So you've got a malnutrition issue, and it's close. It's not, but it's close in my mind to being a root cause, where you're like, well, even if I'm not contributing to these kids getting a chance to go to school in the third world, but at the same time, if they're malnourished from when they're 2 years old, they're not going to have the brain capacity to go to school later. So I think that's the other element, the two things, the two take home points. If people take nothing away from this outside of do it now, and also just pick something and work with it, because that relies on someone else to fund the charity that's trying to build them schools and give them water and give them food. But if you get lost down that rabbit hole of trying to fix everything, you're actually going to fix nothing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you've convinced me. I will set up my donation after this, which
we can do it on live stream if you want. No, I'm
not that tech savvy, to be honest, but I will send you a screenshot once it's done.
Well, this was not supposed to be a we had no intentions of talking about charity at all, but as always, it kind of just led down to that rabbit hole. But like I said, I think it's an important topic that you and I have both probably spent a lot of time independently, like tossing up and probably overthinking to a large degree. That seems like something that we'd do.
Yeah, no, exactly. As you point, like I had, rationalizations and things like that, as understandably we all do, about why I hadn't acted on it. And I'd tried to mitigate that by setting that Schelling point of, once that next pay rise comes through. But now let's shift the Schelling point forward. Like it'll be once this podcast ends, like that's when I'll act on it. And I think you raise a fantastic point about, because that's exactly how I tackle my own sort of, my own productivity sort of habits and hacks. It's like, just, eat the frog first, as they sort of say, like do the most unpleasant thing, blah, 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 get it out of the way. And we forget how much we can just smooth over these sort of, like, let's say setting up a donation to charity is unpleasant. Like, not that it should be considered unpleasant. Like it's unpleasant to not have that charity, picking you up from bleeding out in the gutter. Like that's the truly unpleasant thing.
Unpleasant. Yeah.
But yeah, the second you set it up, like you'll feel probably like a good little boost of like, oh, that feels nice. And then you forget about it. Like, as you said, like the good thing is, and the point that Scott Alexander made in that article is like, do it. It's like a set and forget, but by setting and forgetting, you can also live with the comfort of, no, this is the established Schelling point. If you do this, you are doing enough. You don't have to pander to people shaking tins on the street. You don't have to you can feel comfortable that, once you hit that Schelling point, you are doing enough, whatever. Like that's for each person to grapple with their own sort of psychology. And he wasn't saying that like, hey, if you could give more, you don't have to. It was just that we stay in this constant tug of war of like, oh, should I, shouldn't I? And we actually end up wasting years of when you could have. And I think that's kind of the point you were speaking to. It's like, yeah, if it turns out to be not the one you care about, change at a later date. But
it's like I said, the set and forget is really important. And like you can, that's actually, I remember thinking that when I was doing it, it's like, if I'm going to set and forget, I would rather set first. Other than, the 100%. Next time you'll think about charity is when there's an explosion in Lebanon, or when there's something horrific happening, and then you're overwhelmed by this negative emotion, which not very often, I think that wave of negativity often leads us to overwhelm more than it does to promote positive action. I think a lot of the Black Lives Matter stuff that's going on is a really good example of, I guess, a positive outcome, and quite a tumultuous outcome that's had to happen. But we also look at the like huge amount of racial issues and discriminations and horrific things that have happened that have led to more overwhelm than action. And I think this is it. You just need to draw a line in the sand, like I said, set a Schelling point and just do it, because then you're going to forget about the charities. But now that's okay. Like you can, that's a morally, I guess, you can sleep better knowing that you've forgotten about a positive thing than a negative thing.
Yeah, that's again a fantastic point, and I think the unfortunate irony in not doing that way is that, like as you said, there's been sort of an uprise in pro-social behavior and sort of general awareness for what has just happened in Lebanon. Like I saw my Facebook notifications before, it was like, so-and-so has invited you to like X awareness page or like something. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of nice. But the point you were sort of getting at, and maybe you weren't explicitly stating it and I might be misunderstanding here, is, but like, if you don't do the set and then forget method, and you do the sort of forget method first, the only thing that can motivate positive or benevolent thought patterns is something horrific and horrendous happening. So it's like, it must be the bad in order to get the good. And that's not what we want to happen. So I think you're 100% correct in set and forget. And yeah, for those sort of listening at home, if anyone is inspired, like, I'll be going on to, I think the Effective Altruism website is givewell.org. I'm not sure what the dot thing is, but I'm sure if you typed in Effective Altruism, it would come up. But from memory, GiveWell is what the actual domain name is. So I'll go there. I'll start there. And yeah, hopefully we can set and forget.
Exactly right.
Not forget, set and move on to bigger problems.
Exactly. Yeah, like you said, really, really good way of phrasing it is that why wait for something super dramatic to force you into action when you could set that arbitrary Schelling point for yourself, and actually be proactive with your response to something. Mate, we really covered up some stuff. Let's circle back to the start. Hi, Lyndon. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, mate?
Yeah. So, hi, Braden. It's nice to be here. My name, as you said, is Lyndon James Purcell. My confirmation name, from a previous life when I was a more strict adherent to the preachings of Catholicism. My confirmation name is Sebastian, after Saint Sebastian.
Really? I was going to say we have the same middle name, funnily enough. So I mean, that obviously
there's not many people out there with the middle name James.
Exactly right. I mean, n equals a few, and the ones that I've met on this podcast have been great. Right. Okay. So how does that work? Is that a confirmation name being? Explain that term for me, because I haven't actually come across that.
Okay, so it's
how does that weigh in from a legal standpoint?
I really don't think like there's anything to it. I'm not sure. Like, it wouldn't be surprising to state that I don't quite understand the mechanisms or reasoning that the Catholic Church employs, but the general, I guess you've got like baptism, and then you've got your first Holy Communion, and then you've got your confirmation, and there's a variety of sort of things that events, I guess, that you sort of transition through as a Catholic. I think the Jews, they have their bar mitzvahs and things like that. Ours seem to be a lot less exciting.
Yeah, you get way less money at the Catholic ones, I think.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And like, man, this is actually something like side point, but I've become really appreciative for, and I wasn't at the time, but when I think we did confirmation or first Holy Communion or whatever it was, but there's, it was sort of a big deal in our small country town, and your family comes along and watches you, and you get this sort of like little medallion thing. And a lot of my friends were getting like cool necklaces, things with engravings, bracelets, like from their family.
Jesus
And
piece.
yeah, like my family didn't give me anything, and I was like, as a 12-year-old or whatever I was really, really shitty about it. But I guess in later life become, he says as a 27-year-old,
Yeah.
in later life I've become extremely appreciative of my upbringing, and that, I guess that's a small example of it, that like that was so needless to, and not to say that like anyone else was doing it incorrectly, but it was so unwarranted that I deserved some gift. So I'm glad that my parents and my grandparents didn't give me anything for that. But the point is, I guess, yeah, for your confirmation, we had to do basically a project, and you have to nominate some kind of saint that you want to be confirmed in the name of, I guess, and someone whose values that you embody. So we had to do a project on them, and I did my project on Saint Sebastian, who was supposedly lived after being shot by like 1,000 arrows. So
yeah, if that's the metric for choosing, like hands down, I don't know what the other ones better have some cool superpowers if they're gonna try and beat that.
Yeah, there were so many boys in our class that picked. I think there was a name. He must have been like Saint Wolfgang or something like that. So every boy in class, bar me, was like, "Yep, Wolfgang. Like that is the one." So yeah, I guess that's my long tangent on the name that I don't actually have.
Yes.
From a legal status.
So just to clarify for anyone listening, for anyone watching, so I put out a little like a vlog on YouTube just to kind of play with the medium, and there's a lot of reasons why I did that, and to practice storytelling, and actually just learn how to use my camera and that kind of stuff. And I've done a few chats with people as well, and from some of my earlier chats, some of the feedback I got was basically like, have a point to things. Now, intentionally with the vlog and with the chats, I actually like keeping it vague, right? I like just kind of seeing where things go. So this will not be the conversation that has a point, just to clarify. Maybe next time I chat to someone, but probably not. Like, people can keep waiting for that. This is definitely not going to be it.
We might get to a point afterwards, but I guess that we don't know what the future holds.
We'll see how good my editing is, if I can, a neat little package at the end. I'm not going to edit it. So, mate, tell us a little bit more about kind of what you're doing, ThereforeThink. So obviously we met through the personal training and fitness space. And Lyndon, you're very well known and growing within the evidence-based community, which is nice to see, massively growing in popularity around the world. So I guess if you could just touch on, I guess, what your day to day is, and then for better use of a term, your hobby horse and ThereforeThink.
Yeah. Well, as we sort of briefly touched on when bring up Jacob, like I work for a company called JPS Health and Fitness. My title is the Manager of Educational Services. I guess have a number of roles in undertaking that position. It is around sort of creating, curating, and ensuring that the quality that others are producing is up to scratch. Sort of internally and from an external perspective, I guess we do a lot of educational stuff, not only speaking to sort of general health and fitness enthusiasts, but also trying to speak, say, more specifically to some coaches and other like allied health practitioners. So I guess we try and educate the broader masses, as well as the people that might be training or working with the broader masses as well. Other components of my role involves just like the general coaching of people, which is really good. You don't ever want to, I think, if you're in a position like mine, you don't ever want to completely move away from coaching. I think a lot of people get into the industry, maybe not a lot. There is a portion of people that get into the industry with the sort of the goal of being a coach for a few years and then sort of getting above that and doing, say, a role similar to my own, but where you just say like travel the world and give presentations about coaching. And I think that's totally viable to do sort of something similar to that and have that as a goal. But I don't think you want to, I guess it comes back to the skin in the game concept. It's like, don't insulate your beliefs from the empirical evidence and I mean empirical in that regard of just like, not necessarily scientific, but just like what reality dishes up. Like, don't be that person that just becomes absorbed in a theoretical bubble, completely cut off from how it is to actually train someone in the flesh. And sort of the other component of my job is work with the coaches, ensuring they're sort of happy, looked after, progressing, not just as individuals, but also helping their clients progress. And yeah, I guess I spread myself across a lot of different things in that regard, but it keeps it interesting and I enjoy it. And then in regards to ThereforeThink, this has been a hobby horse. I guess maybe that's probably the best way to describe it. But I obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but I do hope it becomes a more prominent sort of theme of my life in the future. I feel completely sort of like I'm dedicating inadequate time to it currently. Like, would love to obviously research more, write more, spread better ideas, think, even just like put more of my thoughts on paper so that I can think more clearly about things. And I guess I built ThereforeThink, sort of the website, with help obviously from my sort of co-founder Cadd, who's a more sort of silent partner for everyone asking. It's like, when's Cadd going to post? And it's like, he's got a big man's job where he can't get in too much trouble for, not to say that like my job, doesn't have its, serious elements to it, but he has a job where he might more seriously get in trouble if he says something that doesn't quite fit with whatever the organizational narrative may be. But yeah, he still is a significant contributor and provides me with significant guidance in that regard. So I don't ever want to minimize the role he has played. But for the most part, I guess it is a platform for me to put thoughts out, put things out that I think, and one, in regards to helping to hopefully spread better ideas, but also to explore my own thoughts, because there's a very useful element to writing thoughts down. And just in general, I wanted a platform like ThereforeThink so that I could explore, as the predominance of this conversation has probably shown, the interests that I have outside of health and fitness. Like I really love health and fitness, and I really love what it can do for people. But I do, funnily enough, as much as we bashed on alternative medicine, I do think about life in a very, very holistic way. And I think if you're just maximizing health and fitness, you're not really at all maximizing how well you're living your life, or your happiness or whatever, if you're not considering many, many other things. So yeah, that's my rant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was like doing some thinking about how about kind of how to run through the intro today. And I guess it
went well.
it went well. We completely tossed it out. Thank you. Planned that, curated that well. Little puppet master here. So I think the first word that people will get after the intro is, I think, horse reiki. So that's important. Again, so exactly like my list said. I guess it's quite an understated term, but I guess the best way to describe you, and I hope this comes across with the weight and the I guess gratitude that I wanted to. But I think a lot of people would describe you as first and foremost a thinker, and that seems to, on the outskirts, like a very easy thing to say, because we all think of it as a very easy thing to do. But to say thinking is easy because we all do it, I think is a lot to say, like, we all understand physics because we all play with gravity all the time. It's like there's a lot of depth to how well you want to do it. And just because someone exists doesn't necessarily mean they think, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they think critically. And I know that's something that you spend a lot of time about, a lot of time thinking about, is how do how do you think about how you think? And so, I mean, that seems to be a pretty consistent underpinning to a lot of your writing, a lot of your work. Would I be right in saying that? And is that kind of dictated? It seems like that's kind of dictated the direction of a lot of your writing, and I guess probably a lot of your life over the past few years.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'll start there. Like, that is, for someone that holds my beliefs, an extremely large compliment. And I think you are very much correct in your analysis that people maybe undervalue the difficulty of thinking, or believe they do it to a greater extent than what they do. I think because people hold conclusions, they think they thought their way to those conclusions. But often it's the case of we rationalize and find reasons for our conclusions after the fact. That's if we think about them at all. And for the most part, we just operate, because like it's the conclusions we come to that determine how we act. And we all basically hold an enormous repertoire of conclusions that we didn't actually arrive at sort of due to any logical reasoning. It's very much a case of sort of the random effects of just life and as it happened to us, how we were feeling at a single point in time, things that got associated together, the way people treated us, the way we misread situations, all things like that. So I guess I do try and think a lot and think about thinking, because I think that is very foundational to our experience. So you are, again, correct in your analysis that I guess it is something that I care significantly about. And I guess I arrive at this conclusion because I think our brain is just fundamental, and really the only thing that it's our only instrument to interpret and interact and sort of even like be within the world with. And that's all sort of very abstract and philosophical, but like no matter what you care about, I think you're going to have a hard time to suggest that having a more effective brain won't help you get that. Or or even just like if you don't want to consider it from a rationality perspective, let's say you are someone that is on the complete opposite end of the perceived spectrum, this dichotomy between analytical and sort of emotional sort of thinking. Let's say you are someone that is just, you love your romantic movies, you are just a hyper sort of social, emotional person. You empathize, you sympathize with people. You don't care about, the underlying logic of something. The emotions you experience are still a product of your brain. And I think like you wouldn't even have the ability to perceive the external world if it wasn't for the gray matter and the white matter that exist inside your cranium. So I guess at that level, I'm just extremely taken by brains, and am very, I see a portion of what I can contribute to the world as hopefully encouraging people to take better care of theirs, maybe from a health perspective, as well as just say like a software perspective, and how they they use what the programs they run within their brain and how that helps them act within the world, because the way they act within the world also feeds back into their perceptions, and the way they interact with the world also determines the kind of perceptions that other people have of the world. And it's like, of all the good things and all the negative things that we experience, it all is experienced at the level of the brain. It's like, even if you cut your finger off, like, you only know that is painful or something that has detracted from the value of your life at the level of the brain. So I think we can do a lot by really getting in there and trying to sort out some issues. And I guess that's what I try and do for myself. And I try and help others do that as well.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, isn't it? Is that like the only way we can physically affect that, the only way we can physically affect our thought patterns is by thinking enough about it that it results in a physical outcome. And it's like that circle back of, well, you can't just get in there and, well, I mean, you could just get in there and poke around, but it's not going to create a lot of positive outcomes. But it's like the only metric we have for communicating with your own thoughts is by thinking about it. And maybe we need another word to make that less convoluted and easier to understand. But I think hopefully that makes sense.
Metacognitive should be fine.
Yeah. I really like, even in this chat alone, from what we've had, and I'm sure going through editing and reading and watching it back, I'll take a lot more factors away from it. But even in this alone, I think you've deconstructed probably 3 or 4 continuums or false dichotomies that I didn't know I had. So, a false dichotomy obviously being, I say obviously, a false dichotomy being this forced either or type situation. We're forced into this light switch of, well, is it on or is it off? When realistically, most things in life are a dimmer switch, and it can be somewhere in between. Or it can be a lot of one and a little of the other, and it's constantly moving as well. I mean, already we've talked about kind of the left and right wing, and conservative and liberal, and how those terms can be restrictive. We talked about, I know for you and myself, spend a lot of time thinking about the dichotomy of good and bad. And even there, like you talked about pro-social versus anti-social, and how that can be potentially a better metric of, not one or the other, but also how that can be a lot more of a sliding scale than good and bad. Already looking at it through a different lens changes how you're interpreting that. And you said something there that triggered that as well. But I think, again, if people were to take, I know something I'm going to take away from this chat is also to really attempt to pull yourself up every time you're looking or having a conversation, and forcing the dialogue to go through that false dichotomy of, well, is it this or is it that? Because it's so easy to fall into that trap.
I think.
Yeah.
Sorry. Did you say something?
No, I was gonna move on, but if you've got stuff to add.
Yeah, I guess the maybe the point I'll put at the end of that sort of statement, I'll try and keep it short, because I like to waffle. All that, from my understanding, and this is definitely, as you mentioned, a hobby sort of project. This is something that I explore in my spare-ish time. So I can only speak from my understanding, but basically all our emotions, not our emotions, all our decisions, even the ones we perceive as analytical, as extremely critically thought out, stem from basically an emotional basis. There's a book called Descartes' Error by, I believe it's, oh man, now I'm getting a few of my fitness names mixed up. Antonio Damasio. That's not the guy in the fitness industry, I don't think.
It sounds like a name.
I think it's Antonio. Either way, the book is.
If I knew what I was doing, I would say I'll chuck it in the show notes. I might check the show notes. You'll like and subscribe while you're there. Check the show notes. I'll see if I put anything in there.
It'll be funny for you either way. If it's not there, then
just put a middle finger emoji and see how we go.
Basically, his thesis, sort of in the book, is he studies people who have like brain injuries or brain lesions and things like this. And that when you sort of, you disconnect the more rational, analytical parts of our brain from sort of the emotional basis that the neocortex is sort of wrapped around, we basically can't reach conclusions. It's there, yeah, as you said, there's not this dichotomy between, oh, that's an emotionally fueled decision and that's an analytical, like a cold-blooded analytical decision. It's like, I am often considered to be a very analytical, rational, unemotional person, and I'm not sure what that actually sort of that means when I insert my current understanding of this topic, that basically everything does sort of just filter up from sort of this emotionally fueled, intuitive, somewhat basis. But I'll sort of leave it at that, and as just, yeah, the dichotomies that people see just aren't as existent as they appear to be. And I think we can really level up our understanding of the world if we look for those divisions that we can remove.
Again, I've got really, really good points there. I've got a lot of stuff. I think we could do a deep dive on this. We might save it for next time, because I'm sure we'll have many chats and have again, next time we chat, I'm sure it'll be absolutely nothing like what we planned anyway. So I look forward to that. But I guess bring it back to some of the more things, some of the things we did kind of discussing. I really did want to touch on a few of the more practical elements. So, I mean, I guess for people who are interested, I think a lot of the people who are going to come across this will be probably of a similar mindset of, I don't think anyone who needs to be convinced of the value of improving their thinking patterns is going to be going out of their way to watch or listen to a podcast on metacognition. But for people, assuming that people are kind of interested in going about that, can you speak from, what's worked from you, or whether you want to take it to a science place of, well, how can you get better at thinking or identifying faulty thinking? Because so much of it does just, occur. There's such a natural factor of us just living our lives.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's something I obviously think about a lot. I am still somewhat confused and unsure about how much I have learnt to think in a better way. I believe that I have. But as we've sort of established, like if I presume there are false beliefs that others have, there's very likely to be false beliefs that I have. That could be one of them. But without getting too meta, I believe that I have improved my thinking. The question then becomes, was I somewhat on that trajectory already? And was I going to improve my thinking already? Or because, like, for example, I've spent a lot of time reading books on this topic, reading blogs called, like, for example, one of my favorite blogs is Less Wrong. If you haven't heard of that, both you, Braden, or listeners, I'd certainly recommend checking it out. Like Eliezer Yudkowsky, I think, is just a phenomenal writer on this topic. And I guess it stems somewhat back to the correlation, causation kind of discussion, is like, because I'm interested in these things, was I sort of likely to be, a better thinker on average anyway? Am I, because like there's a really interesting article in that on Less Wrong that Scott Alexander, someone I referenced before, who also writes for his own blog. Man, I'm just like the blog guy, promoting all these blogs, but he also writes for his own blog called Slate Star Codex, which is like, he writes really long blogs. So if you're not into long format things, steer clear of there. But he's like an amazing thinker as well. And he wrote an article for Less Wrong that basically goes over, it's something like 90% of the Less Wrong audience are INTJs. and like he's a psychiatrist, and he's like, man, the Myers-Briggs, not the best sort of like personality test, but he's like, whatever it measures, it seems to be picking up a ton of INTJs in the less wrong community. And as someone who scores an INTJ on the Myers-Briggs myself, that's I guess very interesting to me and something to consider. There's just, was I attracted to this content because of, say, just predispositions that I had? How much has reading content like this made me a better thinker? So rather than spitting out questions that I have, I will potentially try and answer. But I guess probably two things that I have, and this is, again, something I'm not sure about because I'm very aware of my own limitations, or I try to be. One is just there are different perspectives out there, okay? So you need to speak to other people, and the job is, I guess, I think first recognizing that you don't share the exact thoughts as what someone else does, and then you need to work out roughly what is actually going on. And that means, not just going, okay, this person sees black and I see white. Is it black or is it white? But it is, how much is this black? How much is it white? Like, what is sort of the shade of gray that we're looking for? So it's the recognition that there's other positions you can hold, and then trying to qualify, I guess, the sources of information that you have. That's sort of probably the general goal. The thing that I've found extremely useful for thinking more clearly, I think it's a good way to sort of like pull yourself up, from your bootstraps or whatever. I don't get axioms and sayings very well. So this is going to sound extremely silly following on from that. But I think one of the best pieces of advice that I could give when it comes to thinking clearly is to spend more time thinking about language, because really you do think in sort of these language sort of structures. And I guess I think one of the things you want to recognize is that there are, I guess, and I wrote this in my critical thinking article, is that there are sort of like, there's sayings such as you've got to spend money to make money. And then there's sayings such as $1 saved is $1 earned. And once you recognize that both of those allow someone to justify whatever they want to do, you take those two pieces of information and go, okay, what do I actually believe about these things? It's like, these both can't be entirely correct. So then you try and start developing some kind of, I guess, nuanced perspective on that single issue. Like, that's, I guess, a really simple sort of, hopefully a simple example, but I guess the final example I'll give in this regard is the saying that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence is very popular in sort of critical thinking circles. But from, I guess, like a normative probability perspective, and I might be butchering some of these terms here, so if some statistician wants to listen and crucify me, that's totally fine. But basically, you need to have multiple hypotheses and theories or models of the world, and the absence of evidence should actually be, somewhat evidence to support another theory. Basically, people use the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence to justify that their theory can still be true even if evidence isn't showing up. But it's like, well, if the evidence does show up, you're going to use that to support your theory. And if the evidence doesn't show up, you can explain that away by saying absence of evidence the saying.
Absence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it's like in a world where you can't, like, mutually exclusive hypotheses can't exist, and the total probability of all hypotheses, say, needs to add up to one. Like, something needs to give. If we're not seeing evidence, it's not proof that your theory doesn't exist, but it is actually evidence that it doesn't. What you're saying isn't actually true.
Yeah. Yeah. It's at least it is still data. And the fact that we don't have data on to support your idea doesn't disprove your idea, but it's also a data point. It's something that suggests that maybe it's more likely that yours isn't the case. Am I kind of paraphrasing that?
Yeah, no, you have like said it in a much more pithy way than I have. I guess what we need to, just from your own thinking perspective, you need to work out like what you actually believe and what you're sort of just like where you're like widening the lines to sort of catch things, and where you're like narrowing to miss something out. Like, from a cognitive perspective, you need to, I guess, you don't need to understand these really complex frameworks and like Bayesian statistics and cognitive science at the sort of crazy detailed level. What you actually need to work out, and that this is why I think Eliezer's really good, is he speaks about basically like making a better decision maker from the inside out. It's like, as a human being, you need to learn to make better decisions, not reading papers on decision theory or how, we're going to align AI with human values. It's how does Braden Cadd, the person, detect when he isn't making a possibly the most rational decision? And I think for that, you need to just be more conscious of when you're sort of widening and narrowing those lines.
Yeah, so that I find a very good mental picture as far as, and like it seems, this is probably an oversimplification of, like you said, is a very, very quite heavy concept. But I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? So many people throw out their net and then, just actually just throw back what they don't like. If you're willing to cast the net, you also need to then be willing to eat what you catch, basically. And wow, I really butchered that metaphor, but I think we got there in the end. Fishing's bad. I mean, as I guess an oversimplification or actually making something like a confirmation bias more extreme, I think that's a really good mental picture for, for decision making as well. Is that, we think of it in quite this broad terms, but it really is just about how someone weighs the evidence that they actually do or don't collect.
Just even, I think the trick that we need to develop, it's the thing that sort of gets you in the fight, is just remaining sensitive to when you might be doing that, because it's just like, you need to break out of the thought in order to sort of then step back and analyze it. And it's that you just need to be going, oh, wow, actually, maybe this is one of those moments where I'm just justifying my behavior. Okay, do I think this is, and like, it's when you've sort of got to that point, then you have an opportunity to be more rational and analytical about it.
Is that kind of one of the key markers then of when you've not achieved success, but when you've started undertaking the critical thinking process, is, I guess, being able to interrupt thoughts and evaluate them as they occur to you? I mean, for me, I guess the practical output of someone who is a good critical thinker, I guess, or a good, critical thinker in an argument, is that ability to make a statement and then stop, or ideally stop before you make the statement and go, well, is this actually what I believe, or am I just kind of rationalizing what I want?
Yeah, I think if I've understood you correctly there, yes, I think sort of from maybe a visual sort of perspective, I guess I try and reason myself to a point, and then sort of recognize that that is one of the beliefs that I hold, and then sort of go back and try and start again. Like, okay, if that's sort of first go through this, that's what I think. What are possibly the things that make me think that? Like, and I try and sort of, I guess, give myself multiple looks at this rather than going, oh, this person sent me a text message and it's like, fuck that person. Like, they're a bitch, blah, blah, blah. I was right. I told them about this the other day. And then just acting on that, it's going, okay, that's the first sort of instinct I have, is to respond negatively, blah, blah, blah. Then it's, okay, how else could I read this? Am I potentially missing something? And then I guess I try and do that through, like, depending on the decision, like, I guess I'm speaking in a very sort of theoretically optimal manner, and we don't have time to reflect on every single decision we make throughout the day. But, you know, if you're considering some kind of big, say, you know, like career change or like this, that, or the other, you probably do want to construct like multiple different alternatives and analyze them as best as possible. And something I think that you want to, once you've reached a variety of different possible conclusions, the step that you want to branch out to from there is just like, okay, what motivations and incentives are there for me to want to believe this is true and to think that this is true? I guess like a way I sort of almost think about this in regards to like relationships between people as well. I think that's a pretty good model for understanding our own thoughts, is because like really there is no Lyndon Purcell or Braden Cadd. Like there is this amalgamation of like different systems and subsystems all competing in one way or another, and sort of the one that wins out at any single point in time is how you act. But it's like really you are kind of made up of basically like all these identities within you. There's like Braden Cadd, the hungry person. There's Braden Cadd, the horny person. There's Braden, like,
that's
you know
it.
what I mean?
They're the two. Yeah.
Braden Cadd, TikTok superstar. But, like, yeah, like there are times when I'm like, holy crap, like I am that far away from rational Lyndon that like, you know, I feel irate. I feel like whatever, like I just want to go out and rave for 3 days straight. Whereas like then, you know, half an hour later, I'm brain health guy and you know, things like that. So I guess I think once you have that recognition that there's sort of multiple selves within you, you can begin understanding how they interact and come to decisions and communicate using models of like actual people within the world. And I guess the way that I think about this in regards to incentives is, let's say you like, whether it be at work, like as a manager at work, this is something I need to think about a lot, and I do think about it a lot, is how do I get the truth out of like, you know, employees, staff, colleagues? Like they're all very nice to me, okay? But as a manager, they have a reason to be nice to me. And if I want the truth out of them, then I need to basically construct an incentive system that supersedes that one. Again, like no one is going to tell you the truth if there's like a high probability that they're going to lose something by telling you the truth. Like the people I work with don't gain, you know, workplace political brownie points by saying, Lyndon, you fucked up on that one. Like they go, oh no, you did a good job and it was like X, Y, Z. And for working out whether I acted correctly, I need to then sort of disentangle the incentives from that. So I've said again a ton there. I would like to hear your thoughts on this matter.
Huge. Yes, huge. So first of all, we'll have to do a part 2 just for my own sake to unpack a few more of these ideas. I think that's like, I think that discussion on the interplay of the selves is really I mean, you should package that into a book, because Deepak Chopra would love that. But the interplay of the selves, I think, is really interesting, because even just as a mental image to look at, if we do look at all these, like, if it's easier to conceptualize them sealed into smaller selves within us, and it's a lot more nuanced than that, but humans are not good at dealing with nuance. So if we took all the parts of ourselves and packaged them into smaller selves, I think learning as the meta, the kind of overarching figure, how to take elements from each and combine them is probably one of the best skills we can develop. Like, you've got the Lyndon that wants to rave for 3 days, and the brain health Lyndon. And as the less mature we are, I think in a lot of ways, the more we're forced into, or the less rational we are, the more we're likely to pick brain health Lyndon or rave Lyndon. And I guess the skill is then in understanding the nuance of, okay, well, how do we be a little bit of rave Lyndon, but maybe just for 2 days instead of 3? Or how do we, I know you've written in the past on how do we be rave Lyndon while looking after brain health Lyndon, or vice versa, and I think the fitness industry is rife with a lot of that as well. Like I said, you can be health Lyndon, or gym bro Lyndon, but you also want to be, family support Lyndon. And how do you kind of interplay those elements, and then taking that out to the macro, and then once you've got rave Lyndon that only raves for 2 days instead of 3, like, okay, well, then what's the next step from there? Do we then combine that Lyndon with another, with your health and fitness gym bro Lyndon, or something like that? And I think that for me is a really practical kind of mental image for I guess how we want to evolve as people. I like to visualize everything through a game leveling up system, because it's the only way I can actually think. But I mean, that for me at least is a really practical, I guess, oversimplification of a big concept. And the other thing I thought in there was, that's a really good lesson for anyone in that role of authority, of even with family members, sometimes the Christmas and Thanksgiving, where there's so much of your day-to-day interactions where it is much more socially efficient, and you're incentivized a lot more for saying the right thing versus saying the true thing. Obviously there's situations where that's fine, if someone in the street asks you how you're going and you say, "Oh, good, thanks," when you're not, like, that's a socially efficient way of getting through that interaction, getting back into your comfy clothes and slippers at home. But there are also times at work where it becomes, or with your partner, where it becomes a lot more, it does you a lot more of a disservice to just pick that brownie point option. And I think that is a really important message. I don't know how many people listening to this will be in kind of managerial roles, but I think there's a really good framework that I think a lot of people, whether they're at a managing level or not, should be kind of looking at.
I was just going to say, you don't necessarily need to be in a managerial position. Like, you do just want to understand that your understanding of the world is extremely incomplete, and you rely on sources of data. Like, you only have 24 hours in the day to see, you're not even awake 24 hours a day. 16 hours a day, you can put your eyes on something. But then if you speak effectively with someone else, you can, gather the data from their 16 hours. And like, communication, and just however you go about it, is basically tapping into the information and knowledge stored in someone else's nervous system. So it's like, other people are great sources of data. Okay. But you need to work out, as I said, like, what are the incentives? What are the things that they're including that didn't actually happen? And what are the things they're omitting that did happen? And then you can more effectively interact with that data. And I guess that finally brings us to the point of sort of thinking scientifically, which was the point of this conversation already.
Which was the point of the conversation, yeah.
That was one. The other thing I will say is just in regards to the selves. Like, if anyone has sort of any doubts about that, and I don't think people would have sort of say too many doubts, because I think it becomes extremely sort of like evident once you reflect. But a good example of that, possibly, of like the multiple selves, is just how we don't look after basically our future selves. We act for the short term self. That's like, if you just want to split it into like a temporal aspect and a time thing, you will look after today Lyndon rather than tomorrow Lyndon. But that's just a very simple example, and there's way more sort of selves that exist than just today and tomorrow Lyndon. So yeah, that's what I'll finish with.
The take home point is that like, I'm going to picture that from now on as like the little Russian babushka dolls.
Exactly.
And I guess like it's up to you as to, I guess the metacognition element is kind of whether or not you're actually taking the time to unpack all of the dolls, or as many of the dolls as you can identify, and actually choose what order you put them back in.
Yep.
And I think that's something, you know, ultimately, no matter what, you've got the final product, and it's up to you kind of how deep you want to bury certain elements of that, and how many people just walk around with the final product, not actually really scratching off kind of what are lying under the surface there.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy.
Mate, that was big. That was a lot. You ready for a lie down now, or are you gonna write a few more blogs?
I'll probably have to do some of my day job, I guess. I don't know what to call it other than that, but like, I guess I've got to do some JPS work. But no, thank you for at least giving me an opportunity to talk. I clearly think about these things a little bit, and I know you do too. So it's not to suggest that I'm the only one that does it, but when I have the opportunity to talk about them, I get very excited. And I'm very used to that sort of that face people pull when it's just like, you know, Lyndon's just like throwing haymakers, and it's just like, okay, you've done 20 minutes on this topic. Like, how's the weather?
Lyndon, the intellectual haymaker Purcell. Mate, thank you so much for taking the time. It's a long overdue chat, and every time I do come across a new concept, like one of the first things that flashes into my head is I wonder what Lyndon's take on this would be. So I appreciate you taking the time to nut out some of these concepts. Like I said, there's a huge amount of stuff that, you know, we touched on, maybe one of the things that we were planning on discussing today, but I really appreciate you taking the time to help me kind of expand my horizons on a lot of that. And I'm sure there'll be a couple of people that'll listen to this, they'll really take away one or two kind of absolute gems from it. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you for having me on. As I said, I appreciate you listening, but I also, of course, appreciate your insight. I will still, ensure that I act on setting up the donations after this. I thought that was a really valuable chat. And I hope if one person listens to this and then acts on that, like that was worth the half-hour conversation on it. But yeah, again, like this was definitely not a one-sided chat of, I guess it was very one-sided in regards to how much I talked, but not in regards to value obtained. Like you're a great thinker yourself, and I appreciate your insights. And as I said, like, other people are sources of data, and you're a fantastic source of data for me. So whenever you have concepts you want to throw my way, please do, because you're another set of eyes and neurons that I don't have.
I think if you find people that you can look in the eye and say you are a good source of data, and they take that as a compliment, I think you've found your niche. So we're in a good place.
Amazing.
Mate, thank you for that. The last thing I'll say is just, to anyone listening, like, if you do actually go through the process of taking some time to sign up for a charity, again, the point of this wasn't to preach. We weren't even planning on discussing that. But if it does motivate some action or something that you've been thinking about for a while, shoot me a message, because I would love to know. So, Lyndon, thank you. I'll chuck down in the show notes, I'll chuck all the links to ThereforeThink and any other projects you've got going. But Instagram's the best place at the moment. How are you? I know you've got a twisted or tortured relationship with social media. How's the best place for people to get around some of your content?
Yeah. So Instagram is still like a good place to find me. It's my Instagram is l.j.purcell, Purcell. Feel free to message me. I do love, like, you and I speak semi-frequently, sort of like probably frequently. We just have these very like long drawn out conversations where we both take a week to reply.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But like I have like such an amazing like team, I guess, of like collection of people that I get to speak to on Instagram. So I love it for that. I guess I'm just skeptical and wary of many of the aspects on Instagram, So I do try to minimize my time expenditure on there, because if you want to understand things, you've got to read books, research, write, do them. Like it can't be all on Instagram. So find me there. I will reply eventually. Twitter, if like I'm starting that, I don't know if that's the thing I can say now.
Yeah,
but,
go on. Follow him on Twitter as well.
I don't even know my handle on that, but I'm starting to try and work out, because like I guess that's, sorry, like not to dive into another thing, but for my own development purposes, I tend to be an extremely long drawn out thinker. My articles are really long. I need a long time to sort of warm up, but I think that's one of the benefits. I tend to have sort of maybe a higher top speed, but not good acceleration sort of capacity, if we're thinking Need for Speed Underground 2 terms.
Correct. Yeah. The only way I relate. Sure.
But maybe the purpose of Twitter is like working out how much I can condense my thoughts to a certain amount of characters. Final thing I'll say. So yeah, find me there if you want. Like, you might be my first follower.
Yeah, absolutely. Go around and give them some support on the early tweets.
The final thing I'll say is, like, maybe even if like you're skeptical of, and hopefully people aren't, skeptical of the charity thing, and you're unsure of the good that it can do, I think you raised another great example in sort of the parallel you drew to Patreon, or like supporting someone that you have most definitely acquired value from. Because that person is going to probably continue to produce content, and probably do it for free, and you could capture it for free if you wanted to. But as someone who is now creating content, I have begun to, and you're doing this like yourself with a podcast, like we recognize the time cost and the commitment to doing it. And yeah, maybe don't think about it in regards to like paying someone for the content that you've already consumed. It's sort of like you're paying them to incentivize them to continue doing it in the future. Like maybe that philosophized this guy was about to stop, but then it's just like he gets enough Patreon support that he then goes and launches another brilliant season. Like, so I guess I hope just in general we become slightly less concerned with like keeping all the money that we've got and being frugal. And it's just like the more we share it around and like motivate the behavior that we want to see in the world, the better the world will become, I think. So yeah, I promise that's the last rant for today.
Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. And for anyone who's made it this far, good on you. And you can, after that last little final note, you can find us both in Patreon at Lyndon Purcell and Braden Cadd. Mate, it's been an absolute blast. Thank you. And I'm sure we'll chat soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Braden.
Thanks, mate.